Hello viewers and welcome to this week's edition of Economics 101. In this program we discuss everything to do with economics, from banking to finance, mining, manufacturing, as well as the retail industry. And as always, we bring experts in these particular fields, people who have experience in these sectors. Today in studio we are joined by none other than Mr. Trymore Mhlanga, who is a banker, as well as a Mr. Tino Kambasha, who is also an investment analyst as well as expert. In this special edition, we are going to interrogate issues to do with the approach of the national budget presentation, which is on the incumbent. And yes, the nation is very much expectant. Welcome to the show, gentlemen.
Thank you, Kotley.
Thank you, Kotley.
And thank you so much for joining us today. Today we want to look at all these things and more. I guess I will start with you, Mr. Trymore Mhlanga. We are looking at your expert view of the background of our banking sector. This has a huge impediment with regards to our national budget presentation. And we want to know perhaps from you why the people of Zimbabwe have lost interest or have lost hope and confidence in our banking sector.
All right, thank you, Kotley. So basically what we've seen in the banking sector and the financial services sector at large is confidence going down, but we see efforts to actually make it go up yet again. The background is pretty simple, although not to the common man on the street. Why? Because it is about value. So in banking and in the financial services sector, the ordinary individual customer is looking at preserving their value, and if they can, to actually improve on it. So we have seen value being lost in 2008, 2009. That was the hyperinflationary period that we had. Pensioners, life assurers, and all that, everyone lost value. And the values that were in the banking sector immediately, just overnight, lost value, so that somebody didn't have. So these were life savings, these were retirement annuities and the pensions, and at the end of it all, that's how in the main we lost value in, and confidence rather in the banking sector. So what needs to be done? I think we have seen efforts to try and restitute because there are those that lost value, particularly the pensioners.
And we are talking about restoring value. Mr. Kambasha, now on to you. Perhaps we can pay more attention to your field, which is investment. How important is investment when it comes to building as well as restoring value, like Mr. Mhlanga has said?
Very important, actually, Kotley. And investment is one of the key drivers, and I'm sure we're going to hear quite a lot of that in the budget. And when we talk about investment, we're not only talking about foreign direct investment, we're talking about direct domestic investment as well. So,
and what does that framework look like?
So I'll give you an example. We had one of the local companies, a big crocodile farm, purchasing a gold mine, being one of the biggest transactions that went through in that year. So that type of investment is amalgamating assets, bringing corporates together and increasing capacity. And it also then increases our export ability. So I think we should see more drivers towards local companies investing more, because then that way we then create more employment, we export more, and we pay more taxes.
Okay. Yeah, because we're looking at creating ecosystems, like you've said. The very typical example you've cited, which speaks of a crocodile farm buying a mine. But I'm throwing it back to you, Mr. Mhlanga. Is there enough with regards to facilities or situations that accommodate, perhaps if the crocodile farm has an RTGS transaction system, and the gold mine obviously perhaps has a USD transaction system, how important or how seriously are we taking the relationship between those two currencies within the banking field?
I think banks have done quite well in facilitating payments, transactions, and on the whole, and the major function of the finance sector or the banking sector which is financial intermediation.
And the truth is, on the ground, is there real exchange of value, or value is lost by every decimal because of this exchange rate, quote unquote?
Thank you, Ketley. Yeah, value is lost. Now it becomes intricate and complex because on the face of it, when you're talking about currencies, Zim dollar or RTGS versus the US dollar, there is the official exchange rate. And in the main, such transactions are mandated to be done and processed and conducted on the official exchange rate. So there is quite a bit of arbitrage and possible loss of value because of the differential between the alternative market, which is commonly known as parallel market or black market, and the official exchange rate. To put it simply, we are comparing, let's say, 5,800 versus anything between 8,000 and 8,500. And if somebody does forward pricing, yes, they can actually put 10,000. And sometimes they do that not because that's what they think the rate is. They're just saying by the time this transaction ultimately gets consummated, perhaps the rate would have gone to 10 from 8, or just trying to discourage you from bringing the Zim dollar. So you realize that 10, oh no, hang on, I'm better off looking for 8.5 elsewhere. Then you actually fall into what they want, they bring. So, but that discrepancy between the exchange rates is where you find loss of value. And unfortunately, in certain instances, it's not as timeless as it should be. So the rate sometimes can be quite fluid depending on what's in the market. So today it's 8,000, tomorrow it's 8.1, 8.2. If you are talking big values, the difference between 8,100 and 8,300, as an example, would mean significant loss in US dollar terms. So yeah, that's what we have to contend with.
Absolutely. And let's take you've talked about 2 points, perhaps 8.1 to 8.3. But perhaps if it's a huge margin, Mr. Tino, between 8,000 and 10,000, yeah, do sometimes we as Zimbabwe have some kind of, people shun us with regards to investing because of such huge margins, or even the small margins? Do we face some challenges, and do we have every foreign direct investment coming to us even in light of some of these discrepancies?
Well, to be honest, when we look at foreign investment, there are ways the country can mitigate these type of challenges. You can ring fence these issues. You can get exchange control approval prior to you even investing. So there are ways of mitigating. The government has put those measures in place. But when it does come to the disparities between exchange rates, we really need to look at the main cause, right? So we've got, like my good brother just said now, Trymore, he said forward pricing, right? So that's a human feature. It's got nothing to do with the mechanics. Yeah. It's the human element of it. In some elements, and I always mention that I'm sure a couple of guys sit around the table, once a week and say, we think the rate should be X. But that's got
Who are these people? Because from an investment point of view, you should be able to tell us that you have a position to make these decisions with these people.
We went on a massive infrastructure project, right? We did roads, we did bridges, we did dams, right? Just to name a few, and a lot in agriculture as well. So some of them, not all of them, were being paid in RTGS. And they immediately went onto the market and would gobble up because they would have forward priced and would gobble up. So that pushed the rate up. And we saw the Ministry of Finance now, coming in and starting to do part payments to stagger it. And we saw the rate stabilize. So it's obvious where some of these things are coming from. It's from contractors. It's sometimes just the guys on the street at Zimexmo that we see on the street there. So yeah, it's an array of different sectors.
Absolutely. And stay tuned. This is Economics 101. We'll be right back. Thank you for staying with us. This is the second segment of Economics 101, an exclusive episode where we are interrogating the national budget of 2024. And in studio to kind of help me unpack that, as well as give us their insight with regards to investment, as well as banking, is none other than Mr. Trymore, Mhlanga, as well as Mr. Tino, Kambasha. Gentlemen, thank you for staying with us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, and our viewers would like to know, perhaps we want to break down a little bit about venture capital in Zimbabwe. Do we have such a vehicle, first and foremost? And since it seems that banks are forthcoming and, of course, are not transparent, rather, whether we have that facility in Zimbabwe, perhaps I'll throw this to you, our banking expert, Mr. Trymore.
Thank you, Ketley. Yeah, venture capital used to be quite more prominent several years back. Currently, I wouldn't say it is as prominent as it was. In a lot of instances, banks, you find they lend on viability, and then they need a proven track record. So usually they prefer a borrower who comes in with a project already established, who knows what they are doing, with cash flows, proven history, financials, and all that. Then for the greenfields, unfortunately, that would require venture capital proper and perhaps setups whereby a financial institution can perhaps take equity. It then ceases to be just debt, perhaps take equity in the business. Yeah, within the business, and then they partner and grow. My honest view is that currently we're not doing so well on venture capital. We used to have venture capital, standalone venture capital firms. There was a venture capital company of Zimbabwe, VCCZ, at some point. Currently, yeah, that field has been left quite. I see some activity with some capital market players, some guys who can raise funds and all that. My honest view, in short, is that, yeah, not much activity. Perhaps more could be done.
More could be done, yeah. Yes. Because we're taking a look at what perhaps what you said, Mr. Kambasha, where we were speaking about a time in which perhaps another business can buy into another business, and this is perhaps cross-pollination locally. Yep. With regards to businesses. But at the same time, let's talk about foreign direct investment that can come and say we want to support venture capital. Has there been platforms that allow such movement and growth in Zimbabwe?
Well, we've seen a very huge, deliberate step by both the authorities and also some private players. So I'll give an example. We've got the Victoria Falls Stock Exchange. And for that, the platform is there. We've also got the Commodities Exchange. So platform is there as well, whether you want to list your VCs or not. So the platforms are being created. What I would hope to see going forward is more policy to encourage more tax breaks, to encourage more venture capital funds and investment in that area. And also, we would like to encourage our local players, our local pension funds, insurance companies, to also venture into that area. What you're finding right now is they're very sticky to what they're used to, which is equities, and they're going to a few money market instruments, and all these buildings you're seeing, all these little flats and malls that are going up. That's because they're so risk adverse. So what we need to do is to find out, maybe sit around the table and say, why are you uncomfortable? How can we make this environment more comfortable for you? So you can now put more money into the venture capital space, because that is the place where you get a lot of growth in a short space of time if done right.
Is there enough support for firms to grow themselves individually without some of the arrangements like equity, et cetera, for firms just to come up and say, perhaps we are starting and we want to finish as a firm without any special arrangements?
Of course you can. Now it just depends what field you're in, and what your investments are in. Obviously, what I would want to see from this budget is to encourage a people-driven, firm-driven, incentivized budget, right? So we need to see, and I'm hoping to see from the Ministry of Finance, that we will see encouragement for businesses to grow, whether it's through incentives or for some tax cuts for the people to increase their spending, because an economy grows either by spending money from government or by more consumption from the citizens. So I'm hoping to see a deliberate move from the Ministry of Finance to give more people purchasing power, so they trade more and businesses more ability to employ more people and grow further.
Okay, okay. And that's a very, very well-spoken answer. And we want to now tackle the gross domestic product and everything that is going to come out of this national budget, because ultimately we want to see the result as obviously a growth trajectory that comes out of this budget that we are looking at. And we want to obviously interrogate some of the headlines that were gazetted recently that were screaming that our GDP has risen to 67 billion. And perhaps you, Mr. Trymore, can tell us, for starters, what exactly is the gross domestic product to the common man?
Thank you, Ketley. So, yeah, when I looked at that headline,
Yes.
you'll pardon me, I said to myself, over how many years? I was like, this can't be for 1 year. I thought it could be a couple of years, but that was just me thinking. So when you're looking at gross domestic product, which is your question, it's gross, I mean, the sum total,
Yes.
without any deductions having been done. So it's what the produce of all the nation's activities has been. It's usually computed over a calendar year, and it would be for 2023.
So surely we're saying over a year we've achieved 67 billion.
I would have thought we were somewhere, I mean, less than half of that, in the 20s or 30s. And
Mr. Kambasha, do
yeah,
you agree?
in the 20s.
Okay, first of all, there's different ways of calculating
it.
Okay.
GDP. And this method was based on the purchasing power, okay? So, which can be disputed depending on how you look at it and what you're trying to achieve. But for us to dispute that our GDP has gone up, I think that would be wrong. We have seen, I mean, even if you look at from an investment side, look at just China alone, how much they invested. I think it was 3 billion or so. Look at the UAE from nowhere sprouted up to almost $500 million. So we have seen a lot more investments, coming through into the country, and also we're exporting more as well with our bilateral agreements. So yeah, I think our GDP has gone up and our FDI has definitely increased. The calculations are disputable, but they're on a positive trajectory.
Okay, okay. Mr. Trymore, back to you. Perhaps break that down for us. The GDP is being looked at with this statistic and figure, but with regards to the entire banking sector, can we say that this particular figure, perhaps you said it's in half, can you say that this is enough? Are we doing enough as a country, or there's still more to be done?
All right, thanks, Ketley. I mind what one of our African nationalists, Nelson Mandela, said at some point. The moment you climb one great hill, you realize that there are many more hills to climb. Why I make mention to this is because as an economy, we have climbed a few hills. That's a positive. But there are still many more hills to be climbed. Like what Tino says, we can't exactly say there hasn't been progress or we have seen improvement. There has been, but is it enough? Is it where we should be? Perhaps not yet, but we strive to get there. What the mechanics of the calculations, we have seen that also with inflation. I'll just digress a bit, but what you need for you to be able to compare like for like is a bit of consistency in the calculation method. So if you change it and it then comes up with such huge changes, perhaps where we then see from 20 billion to 67, or if it were inflation, from 175% year on year, and then suddenly it's in the region of 20 because we've changed the formula. So I think that would be what the common man on the ground and us analysts also would point to and say, are we then comparing like for like? So we have seen the GDP has grown quite significantly, not too fantastic, but remember we're coming from COVID, and every nation under the, ironically with the exception of China itself, it was registering quite positive, 10%, double digit, some point everyone was going down. So we have, coming from that trough, we have seen GDP growth going up 5%, 4% currently. I think 5.3 is what we also project. The IMF thinks we are in the region of They have revised upwards from 4.1% to 4.8%. But what more we need to do is to ensure that we do quite a bit of value addition, because currently the downside to those GDP predictions is based on exogenous factors that we can't control, like international commodity prices, which have been going down, and we are a commodity exporter. So if they go down, never mind that we actually project to increase more output in the mining sector. The value, when you multiply by a downward going price, is less exports. And when you look at agriculture, we have done quite a lot, but what more we then need to do is to ensure that we are not prone and vulnerable to the effects of El Nino, because climate change is here and is here to stay. So yes, we need to be climate proof and value add so that we are not at the mercy of the international commodity price markets.
Oh yes, and very passionate there with his contribution. And yes, we will be interrogating all things to do with value addition, debt, inflation, as well as some of the foreign direct investment that we have seen on the ground here in Zimbabwe. We are tracking all things to do with the national budget here on Economics 101. Don't go anywhere. Thank you, viewers, for staying with us. This is Economics 101, where we interrogate all things to do with the gross domestic product of Zimbabwe, as well as keep in track with Vision 2030, as astutely by our president, Dr. Emmerson Mnangagwa. And yes, in studio, we are still staying in the conversation, in the loop, with Mr. Tino Kambasha and Mr. Trymore Mhlanga. Mr. Tino, now on to you. Perhaps you can tell us from an investment point of view, where you think Treasury should channel more funds as we track this 2024 budget that is going to be presented to us very soon.
I think Treasury has a very difficult time because, like I mentioned earlier, we need to increase consumption. So I think a people-focused budget would make more sense. And by that, we're looking at ministries that SMEs sit under. I think would also need quite a chunk of the budget. Industry and commerce would need quite a chunk of the budget. And obviously our traditional areas that have always supported the country, which is agriculture and mining. So I think those would be the key areas for me. And obviously—
And infrastructure isn't part of this matrix?
100%.
Okay.
But infrastructure, the main issue that we've seen, and I think I articulated it earlier, that infrastructure actually pushed a bit of the inflationary pressure from our end. So yes, we can put more money into infrastructure, but more smart infrastructure rather than general infrastructure. But I would like to see a more people-based people-based budget that creates more jobs and allows consumers to spend more goods. That would be my take from that.
Okay, and your views on that, Mr. Trymore?
Thank you, Ketley. I'll just build on what Tino said. My one answer, if I were supposed to give it as one word, I would say production, production, and production. So I looked at the consumption aspect. I would like to see more resources channeled towards capacitating and supporting production. Yeah. And in this instance, I'll touch on a few issues, one of which is energy. So we have seen power and energy, we have done a bit, quite significantly. The Wange 7 and 8 power stations increased the demand, but lately, increased the supply rather. But lately, what we have seen is the supply side of power failing to keep up with the demand. So what I would like to see more is more support to enable us to generate more power. And in this instance, perhaps what we may need also to look at is other because we're going towards the sustainability, climate change and all that, let's go solar. But the challenge with solar and perhaps some of the independent power producers is when you look at the electricity tariff, the power tariffs, they need to be reviewed to make it more viable, commercially viable. The challenge when they come to the banks is you look at solar project and you look at its gestation period, payback period, 8 years. I mean, we don't have such funding because our deposits are transitory. So let's support them and enable them. What I also want to see is agriculture, mining, but I want to see a lot more of value addition so that we don't continue to export raw commodities, raw products. When you look at what's bringing in the exports between agriculture, mining and manufacturing, you're talking about 13%, 11, 12, or 10-ish, sum them up close to 50%, and it's raw. We are exporting jobs in that fashion. The jobs that he speaks to, if that value addition could be done locally, some of it is not quite, is not even onerous or capital intensive. Let's do it locally, buy Zimbabwe, produce in Zimbabwe, fill the shelves with Zimbabwean produce, and then we don't cry about the balance of trade being negative, skewed towards a situation whereby we import more than we export and import some things that we could actually be producing locally.
Oh, yes.
Health too. We have a cholera outbreak. Let's fix that and ensure that we don't see such recurrence. And infrastructure is very important. Somebody was saying when you want to look at the health of the economy, just look at the number of cranes that are up there. We have seen residential infrastructure, but we need to see more of commercial and all that.
Well said,
yeah,
well
thank
said,
you.
sir. And we are taking a look as we wind up our conversation. Perhaps tell us this matrix that we are looking at in the 2023 budget. Statisticians were saying that our revenue was close to a certain figure,
Yeah.
but our expenditure, which was looking at about close to 4 trillion, was higher than our revenue as a country.
yes, yes.
How do you explain that as a banker, and how best do we go forward as we wind up our conversation?
Thank you. That's the fiscal position.
Yes.
So if it is in deficit, it then exerts pressure even on every metric, even the exchange rate. Why? Because government then goes and borrows from the banking sector. We have seen TB issuances, and those in certain instances there is such a thing as crowding out. We don't want a situation whereby government crowds out the private sector. Yep. When you talk about the expenditure pattern, what is more important and worrisome is a situation whereby our expenditure is tilted more towards recurrent expenditures. There is no gross capital formation, no development. So we need a situation whereby our recurrent expenditure, our employment costs and all that, to give government to the authorities credit to them, I think we have seen this reduce from, sometimes it was in the 90%, yeah, which then means currently around 50, 60%. It's better. And when you look at that position where we have a fiscal deficit, let it not go beyond the 1.5% of GDP metric.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that's the literal statistic that we'll be looking at, that 1.5%. We do hope, and we are fervent that the ministry will make the right decisions with regards to this 2024 budget. And as we close up our conversation, Mr. Kambasha, perhaps tell us how important within this budget, and is it actually supposed to be mandated? You mentioned 3 countries. You mentioned China, Dubai, and you also did mention another country that has been obviously positively contributing to our economy. But are we supposed to rely on this foreign direct investment, or is it our own taxes that every taxpayer who's watching us today pays, that is supposed to contribute, as well as many other ways to make revenue, not rely on foreign direct investment? How best can you comment on that?
I think it's a balancing act. That's why it's called a budget. It's matrices coming together to build one piece. We can't say we do not want foreign direct investment. We do. We always want it.
But how much is it supposed to be included within our budget? Because the ultimate question is, are we relying on other people to grow as an economy, or we can do this ourselves?
We definitely need a leg up, because like my brother said, we need to have value addition. And we can't do that without foreign direct investment initially. So we need to value add. So I'll give you an example of ore that's going out. We need to smelter it. We need to then from that maybe start off with just smeltering only. And then from that end, we need to see at some point, maybe not
This is in the mining sector.
in the mining
Yeah.
sector, maybe at some point we need to see lithium batteries being made here locally in Zimbabwe, right? But we also need the foreign direct investment to build capacity. So we do need that. But we need our local players to also participate in that, our local funds and our local banks. To participate in that sector as well. So I think it's a juggling act, and obviously initially we need more foreign direct investment, which will reduce as we go forward, as we grow our economy.
Okay, and well said, sir. And we would like to thank you very much for joining us on Economics 101. Definitely a very, very power-packed conversation as we are interrogating all things to do with our national budget. Yes, we were joined by Mr. Trymore Mhlanga. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you, Ketley, and thank you, Zimbabwe.
Absolutely, and Mr. Tino Kambasha, thank you, sir.
Thanks, Ketley. Thank you, Zimbabwe.
All right, and yes, this has indeed been insightful, as well as a very, very succinct look at the budget with our analysts today who have joined us in studio here at our Pockets Hill in Harare, Zimbabwe. Now, my name is Kurtley Gwindi, and it is indeed a pleasant viewing to you, and God bless Zimbabwe.